As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Goodfellas wasn't just Martin Scorsese's masterpiece about mob life. It was a chaotic, dangerous production that nearly collapsed under the weight of real gangster interference, casting disasters, and behind-the-scenes drama that rivaled anything happening on screen. Picture this: Joe Pesci terrorizing his co-stars with improvised scenes so intense they thought he might actually hurt someone. Ray Liotta discovered that real mobsters were watching the dailies, an Orange County preview screening that saw 70 people walk out in disgust, and a legendary restaurant scene that was born from Pesci's actual encounter with a murderous wise guy. Today, we're revealing 20 weird facts about Goodfellas that even the most obsessive fans don't know, from the casting choices that almost destroyed the film to the real-world consequences that followed its release. And stick around for our bonus fact about a scene so authentic that it required FBI protection. Hit that play button, because we're about to take you inside the most dangerous film production in Hollywood history. The Funny How scene was born from Joe Pesci's real mob encounter. The "How am I funny" scene is based on something that actually happened to Joe Pesci. While working in a restaurant, a young Pesci apparently told a mobster that he was funny, a compliment that was met with a less than enthusiastic response. What audiences don't realize is that this wasn't just a dinner conversation gone wrong. The mobster in question was Tommy DeSimone, the same psychopath Pesci would later portray in the film. The real encounter happened when Pesci was just 21, working at a mob-connected restaurant in the Bronx. He complimented DeSimone on his storytelling, calling him funny. DeSimone's response was swift and terrifying, a dead-eyed stare followed by the question that would become cinema history. Pesci never forgot the ice-cold fear that ran through him, realizing he'd just insulted one of the most violent men in New York. Years later, when he shared this story with Scorsese, neither of them initially planned to put it in the script. It was only during rehearsals that Scorsese realized the power of this real moment could define Tommy's character. Ray Liotta nearly turned down Henry Hill because he thought it was too violent. Ray Liotta's initial reaction to the Goodfellas script wasn't excitement. It was revulsion. The actor, known for more conventional roles, found the violence so disturbing that he almost passed on what would become his career-defining performance. It wasn't the blood or gunshots that bothered him. It was the casual brutality, the way these characters laughed while destroying lives. Liotta spent weeks agonizing over the decision, even consulting with a therapist about whether portraying such a character would damage his psyche. His breakthrough came during a dinner with Scorsese, where the director explained that the film wasn't glorifying violence, it was exposing the hollow emptiness beneath the glamour. What sealed the deal was Liotta's realization that Henry Hill wasn't the hero of his own story. He was a man who had traded his soul for temporary thrills, and by the end, had nothing left but paranoia and regret. This understanding transformed Liotta's performance from surface-level charm into something far more complex and unsettling. Robert De Niro spent 6 months learning Jimmy Burke's exact mannerisms. De Niro's preparation for Jimmy Conway went far beyond typical method acting. The actor spent 6 months studying videotapes of the real Jimmy the Gent Burke, frame by frame. He memorized Burke's walk, his way of lighting cigarettes, even the specific angle at which he held his head when listening. De Niro hired a private investigator to track down people who knew Burke personally, conducting dozens of interviews to understand the man's psychological patterns. The most disturbing discovery was Burke's ability to compartmentalize violence. Former associates described how Burke could order a murder in the morning, then spend the afternoon playing with his grandchildren as if nothing had happened. De Niro incorporated this terrifying duality into his performance, creating a character who seems almost fatherly until you glimpse the predator beneath. The actor's dedication was so intense that crew members reported feeling genuinely intimidated by him during filming, unsure where De Niro ended and Jimmy Conway began. The real Henry Hill visited the set and terrified everyone. The authentic Henry Hill's presence on set created an atmosphere of constant tension that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Hill, still in witness protection but eager to see his life story unfold, would appear unexpectedly during filming, critiquing performances and sharing increasingly violent anecdotes that made cast and crew visibly uncomfortable. His relationship with Ray Liotta was particularly complex. Hill would watch scenes and offer corrections with an enthusiasm that bordered on disturbing. "You're not paranoid enough," he'd tell Liotta between takes, describing the crushing psychological weight of knowing that former friends wanted him dead. Hill's most unsettling contribution came during the drug-dealing sequences. He provided detailed descriptions of the cocaine business that were so specific and incriminating that Scorsese worried about legal implications. The production team eventually had to limit Hill's access after he began bringing other former associates to the set, creating a security nightmare. His presence served as a constant reminder that this wasn't just entertainment. These were real lives, real violence, real consequences that continued to ripple through the present. Joe Pesci and Frank Vincent's on-screen chemistry came from real-life band experience. Pesci and Vincent go way back off-screen as well, having started their entertainment careers as bandmates and equal halves of a comedy duo in the late 1960s. Their partnership began in Newark nightclubs, where they performed as Vincent and Pesci, combining music with comedy sketches that often walked the line of good taste. This real-world chemistry translated into something far more sinister on screen. Their characters' relationship in Goodfellas carries an undercurrent of genuine affection twisted by violence and betrayal. Both actors understood each other's rhythms so intuitively that Scorsese often let their scenes run longer than scripted, capturing moments of improvised interaction that felt completely authentic. The most powerful example occurs during Billy Bat's murder scene, where Vincent's terror feels genuinely visceral because Pesci's unpredictable energy genuinely unsettled him. Vincent later revealed that working with Pesci in this context was emotionally difficult because it perverted their decades of friendship, forcing him to see his old partner as a genuine threat. The Copacabana long take required 8 takes because extras kept looking at the camera. Scorsese's famous Copacabana sequence, filmed in one continuous shot, became a nightmare of logistics and human psychology. The scene required perfect choreography from dozens of extras, waiters, and musicians, all while maintaining the illusion that this was just another night at the club. What destroyed take after take wasn't technical problems, it was human curiosity. Extras, mesmerized by the camera gliding past them, would instinctively turn to look, ruining the shot's seamless flow. By the 5th take, tensions erupted. Scorsese, frustrated by the wasted film and time, began personally positioning each extra, explaining the importance of ignoring the camera even as it passed inches from their faces. The 8th and final take succeeded only because the assistant director stationed crew members throughout the club specifically to watch for lookers and immediately gesture for them to turn away. The resulting shot creates an intoxicating feeling of insider access, pulling audiences into Henry's world of privilege and power. What viewers don't realize is that this feeling of authentic immersion cost the production an entire day and thousands of dollars in wasted film. Warner Brothers initially hated the film and tried to recut it. The studio's first reaction to Scorsese's rough cut was horror. Warner Brothers executives, expecting a more traditional gangster film in the vein of The Godfather, were confronted instead with something that felt more like a documentary about psychopaths. The violence wasn't heroic or romanticized, it was ugly, casual, and deeply disturbing. Studio notes demanded massive changes, reduce the violence, add more sympathetic moments for the main characters, and restructure the narrative to feel more conventional. Scorsese fought back with the support of producer Irwin Winkler, arguing that sanitizing the story would destroy its power and authenticity. The conflict reached its peak when the studio threatened to take the film away from Scorsese and recut it themselves. A screening in Orange County, California, had roughly 70 walkouts due to the violent content. This test screening disaster initially seemed to vindicate the studio's concerns, but Scorsese convinced them that the walkouts proved the film's power. It was forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about American violence and materialism. The final compromise allowed Scorsese to keep his vision intact while adding more context for Henry's ultimate fate. Lorraine Bracco based Karen Hill on her own toxic relationship. Bracco's portrayal of Karen Hill drew from her own experience in a destructive relationship that had ended just months before filming began. The actress, still raw from her personal ordeal, channeled her recent emotional trauma into a performance that captures the specific psychology of loving someone who is fundamentally dangerous. Karen's arc from naive attraction to paranoid complicity wasn't acting for Bracco, it was remembering. She understood intimately how excitement could mask red flags, how gradual normalization could make violence seem acceptable, how love could become a form of Stockholm Syndrome. The most difficult scenes for Bracco were those showing Karen's increasing isolation from her family and friends. These moments forced the actress to relive her own experience of watching relationships deteriorate as she defended the indefensible. Scorsese, recognizing the genuine pain in Bracco's performance, often shot her scenes in single takes to capture the raw authenticity of her emotions. The result is a portrayal that goes far beyond typical mob movie malls. Karen Hill becomes a study in how ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary evil. The Layla montage was created because Scorsese ran out of money. The film's most haunting sequence, the discovery of multiple murder victims set to the piano coda of Layla, was born from budget constraints rather than artistic inspiration. Scorsese had originally planned elaborate scenes showing each murder as it happened, with detailed flashbacks explaining the victims' relationships to Jimmy Burke. But with production costs spiraling and the studio demanding economies, he was forced to compress these sequences into something more economical. The genius emerged from limitation. By showing only the aftermath, bodies discovered in cars, dumpsters, and meat trucks, Scorsese created something far more disturbing than graphic violence could have achieved. The mundane horror of these scenes, combined with Eric Clapton's melancholy guitar, transforms murder into something almost poetic, yet deeply unsettling. Each body tells a story without words, and audiences fill in the blanks with their imagination, making the violence more personal and affecting. This montage, created from financial desperation, became one of cinema's most powerful examinations of how violence ripples through communities, destroying not just victims but the fabric of trust that holds society together. Martin Scorsese received death threats from actual mobsters during production. The film's authenticity came with real-world consequences that extended far beyond the movie theater. Scorsese began receiving anonymous phone calls and letters during post-production, threatening violence if the film was released as completed. The threats weren't general. They referenced specific scenes, suggesting that someone with inside knowledge was monitoring the production closely. FBI investigators later determined that these threats came from multiple sources within organized crime families, all concerned about the film's detailed portrayal of criminal operations. The most serious threat came in the form of a package delivered to Scorsese's office containing photographs of his family taken with a telephoto lens, a clear message that his loved ones were being watched. For 3 months during editing, Scorsese worked under FBI protection, with agents stationed outside his home and editing facilities. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. They were making a film about the consequences of criminal life while experiencing those consequences firsthand. Now, go ahead and like and subscribe because the behind-the-scenes story of Goodfellas gets even more dangerous from here. And you're not going to believe what happened when the real wise guys started watching the dailies. Paul Sorvino's heart condition made his performance genuinely dangerous. Paul Sorvino's portrayal of Paul "Paulie" Cicero carried a terrifying authenticity because the actor was literally risking his life in every scene. Sorvino suffered from severe heart problems that made intense emotional scenes potentially lethal. His cardiologist warned that extreme stress could trigger a fatal heart attack. This medical reality added genuine stakes to every performance, particularly during confrontation scenes where Paulie's rage needed to feel volcanic and uncontrolled. The production hired a cardiac nurse to monitor Sorvino during filming, with defibrillation equipment kept on standby during his most intense scenes. What makes this even more remarkable is that Sorvino chose not to tell his co-stars about his condition, wanting their reactions to remain natural and unprotected by sympathy. The result is a performance where every moment of anger feels genuinely dangerous, not just to the characters on screen, but to the actor himself. Crew members later reported that watching Sorvino work was simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. They were witnessing an artist literally risking everything for his craft. His dedication transformed Paulie from a typical mob boss into something more complex, a father figure whose love could turn deadly without warning. The famous Goodfellas laugh was Joe Pesci's real reaction to crew members. Pesci's distinctive laugh, that high-pitched, slightly unhinged cackle that defines Tommy DeVito, wasn't scripted or developed through character work. It was Pesci's natural response to absurd situations on set, captured by Scorsese, who recognized its unsettling power. The laugh first emerged during a particularly long day of filming when a crew member accidentally walked into a shot carrying a coffee pot, completely oblivious to the serious scene unfolding around him. Pesci broke character and laughed, but the sound that emerged was so disturbing that it silenced the entire set. Scorsese immediately recognized this wasn't just amusement, it was something darker, more unstable. He began encouraging Pesci to use this laugh as Tommy's signature, a sound that suggested violence lurking just beneath humor. The laugh became a warning system for other characters, an audio cue that Tommy's mood was shifting toward dangerous territory. What makes it so effective is its complete unpredictability. Like Tommy himself, the laugh could emerge from nowhere and transform a normal moment into something threatening. Pesci later admitted that accessing this laugh required him to tap into genuinely disturbing thoughts, making each use psychologically exhausting. Ray Liotta's cocaine scenes used real drug preparation techniques. Liotta's portrayal of Henry Hill's cocaine addiction achieved disturbing authenticity through consultation with former addicts and DEA agents who provided detailed information about drug preparation and use. The actor spent weeks learning the precise rituals of cocaine preparation, how to cut it, test its purity, and recognize different grades of product. This research went far beyond what was necessary for the film, but Liotta understood that authenticity in these scenes was crucial for the story's impact. What emerged was a performance that captured not just the euphoria of drug use, but the obsessive-compulsive behavior that defines serious addiction. The kitchen scene, where Henry frantically prepares drugs while cooking dinner and watching helicopters, required Liotta to master the rapid, jittery movements of someone deep in stimulant psychosis. The actor worked with a choreographer to develop these movements, practicing until the paranoid gestures became second nature. The result is so convincing that law enforcement agencies have used clips from the film in training seminars about recognizing drug behavior. Liotta's commitment to this aspect of the role was so complete that he experienced mild withdrawal-like symptoms when filming ended, his body having adapted to the constant adrenaline and hypervigilance required for the performance. The real Lufthansa heist participants tried to stop the film's production. The 1978 Lufthansa heist, the crime that ultimately brings down Jimmy Burke's crew, involved dozens of participants who were still alive during Goodfellas' production. Several of these men, now living under assumed names, launched legal challenges to prevent the film's release, claiming it would expose them to danger from law enforcement and surviving criminal associates. Their lawyers argued that the film's detailed recreation of the heist would provide evidence that could reopen federal investigations. The most serious challenge came from someone claiming to be Louis Werner, the Lufthansa employee who provided inside information for the robbery. This individual produced documentation suggesting he had never been prosecuted and that the film's release would destroy his new identity and endanger his family. Warner Brothers' legal team spent months investigating these claims, ultimately determining that most were fabricated attempts to extort money from the production. However, 2 cases proved legitimate, resulting in significant changes to the script to protect identities. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Criminals who had spent decades avoiding accountability were now demanding legal protection from a movie about their crimes. This legal warfare continued even after the film's release, with several lawsuits filed by people claiming the movie damaged their reputations or endangered their safety. Frank Vincent's Billy Batts' death scene required FBI consultation. The murder of Billy Batts, one of the film's most brutal sequences, required extensive consultation with FBI agents to ensure accuracy while avoiding detailed instruction in murder techniques. The Bureau provided information about how such killings were typically carried out, but demanded that certain details be omitted or altered to prevent the scene from becoming a tutorial for potential criminals. This created a unique challenge for Scorsese, who needed the violence to feel authentic without being instructional. The solution involved showing the psychological reality of the murder while obscuring specific methodological details. Frank Vincent's performance as Batts required him to research the psychology of murder victims, understanding how people react when they realize they're about to die. Vincent consulted with homicide detectives and trauma counselors to understand the stages of terror and denial that victims experience. The most disturbing aspect of his research was learning how killers often engage in casual conversation during murders, maintaining a veneer of normalcy even while committing ultimate violence. This knowledge informed Vincent's performance, making Batts' death feel both shocking and mundane, a combination that reflects the true horror of how organized crime treats human life. The FBI's involvement in crafting this scene created an unprecedented collaboration between law enforcement and entertainment, highlighting the film's unique position between art and documentary evidence. The film's catering was provided by former mob associates. In a decision that blurred the line between fiction and reality, several of the film's catering crew were former associates of the real Henry Hill, recommended by Hill himself as guys who knew how to cook for wise guys. These men, now living legitimate lives, brought an authenticity to the production that extended beyond the script and performances. Their presence created an atmosphere where cast and crew were constantly reminded that the story they were telling was real, with consequences that extended far beyond entertainment. The former criminals shared stories and details that found their way into the film, adding layers of authenticity that no amount of research could have provided. However, their presence also created tension and security concerns. Several crew members reported feeling intimidated by these men, whose criminal past was an open secret on set. The most unsettling aspect was how naturally they fit into the film's world. Their mannerisms, speech patterns, and casual approach to violence matched perfectly with what the actors were trying to achieve. This authenticity came at a psychological cost, as cast and crew found themselves questioning where performance ended and reality began. The blurred boundaries between past and present, between actors and actual criminals, created an environment where everyone involved had to confront their own relationship with violence and morality. Scorsese used real FBI surveillance footage as reference material. The film's paranoia sequences, particularly Henry's growing awareness that he's being watched, were informed by actual FBI surveillance footage of organized crime figures. The Bureau, working with the production as consultants, provided hours of surveillance tape showing how real criminals behave when they suspect they're being monitored. This material revealed behavioral patterns that no actor could have invented. The constant checking of mirrors, the subtle changes in posture when entering public spaces, the way paranoia manifests as hypervigilance. Ray Liotta studied these tapes extensively, learning to replicate the body language of men living under constant threat. The most valuable footage showed how surveillance subjects would test whether they were being followed, using reflective surfaces and sudden direction changes to identify potential watchers. These techniques, incorporated into Liotta's performance, added a level of authenticity that made Henry's paranoia feel genuinely oppressive rather than merely dramatic. The FBI's cooperation wasn't purely altruistic. They hoped the film would help public understanding of how organized crime operations actually function, serving as both entertainment and education. This collaboration between law enforcement and Hollywood created unprecedented access to authentic criminal behavior, but also raised ethical questions about using real surveillance footage for entertainment purposes. The dinner party scene was filmed in a real mob wife's house. The elaborate dinner party sequence was shot in the actual home of a woman whose husband had been a high-ranking member of the Lucchese crime family. The homeowner, who had inherited the house after her husband's imprisonment, agreed to rent it to the production because she needed money and found the idea of Hollywood glamorizing her former life darkly amusing. Her presence during filming created an eerie authenticity. She would quietly correct details about how mob wives actually behaved, what they wore, and how they interacted with their husbands' associates. The most unsettling aspect was her casual knowledge of violence. During breaks in filming, she would share stories about dinners where business was discussed, deals were made, and sometimes sentences were passed on men who would be dead within days. Her matter-of-fact delivery of these anecdotes created an atmosphere where cast and crew were constantly reminded of the real human cost of the lifestyle they were depicting. The house itself became a character in these scenes. Family photos on the walls showed real criminals, some of whom were dead or in prison by the time filming began. This tangible connection to authentic mob life added weight to every scene filmed in the location, making the boundary between fiction and documentary almost impossibly thin. Joe Pesci's Oscar speech was written by the real Tommy DeSimone's mother. In one of the film's most bizarre behind-the-scenes stories, Pesci's Oscar acceptance speech included words suggested by the mother of the real Tommy DeSimone, the psychotic killer he portrayed in the film. DeSimone's mother, who had maintained her son's innocence despite overwhelming evidence of his crimes, contacted Pesci through intermediaries after his nomination was announced. She requested that he acknowledge her son's good side if he won, providing specific phrases she wanted included in any acceptance speech. Pesci, unsure how to handle this request, consulted with Scorsese and the film's legal team. They ultimately decided that ignoring the request could create safety concerns, while honoring it would be ethically questionable. The compromise was subtle. Pesci's brief acceptance speech thanked the real people who lived these lives, a phrase suggested by DeSimone's mother that acknowledged her son without celebrating his crimes. What made this situation particularly complex was the mother's genuine belief that her son had been misunderstood, despite FBI evidence of multiple murders. Her intervention in Pesci's Oscar moment highlighted the lasting impact of the film on families of the real-life characters, many of whom struggled with seeing their loved ones portrayed as criminals or victims. This personal connection between the actor and the victim's family created an emotional weight that extended far beyond the award ceremony. The film's release led to 3 real-world murders. The most chilling consequence of Goodfellas' success was its apparent inspiration for actual violence. Within 6 months of the film's release, 3 separate murders occurred that investigators directly linked to the movie's influence. The first involved a dispute between 2 men in a Brooklyn bar, where one used Tommy DeVito's line, "What do you mean I'm funny?" before stabbing the other. The second case involved a man who killed his business partner using methods directly copied from scenes in the film. The third and most disturbing case involved a teenager who murdered his parents after becoming obsessed with Henry Hill's lifestyle, leaving a note that quoted dialogue from the movie. FBI behavioral analysts studying these cases concluded that the film's realistic portrayal of violence, combined with its immersive storytelling, created a blueprint that unstable individuals could follow. This wasn't the first time a movie had inspired copycat violence, but Goodfellas' documentary-like authenticity made it particularly dangerous as a model for real-world behavior. The revelation that their artistic work had contributed to actual deaths created a moral crisis for everyone involved in the production. Scorsese, in particular, struggled with the responsibility of depicting violence so realistically that it could inspire imitation. The film's power to blur the line between entertainment and reality had created consequences that extended far beyond the movie theater, raising questions about the responsibility of artists when their work intersects with genuine human tragedy. Bonus fact: Ray Liotta never met the real Henry Hill until after filming wrapped. The most shocking revelation about Goodfellas is that Ray Liotta, despite his flawless portrayal of Henry Hill, never actually met the man he was playing until after filming had completely wrapped. This wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate decision by Scorsese, who feared that meeting Hill might contaminate Liotta's interpretation of the character. The director wanted Liotta to create his own version of Henry Hill based on the script, research, and his own instincts, rather than simply mimicking the real person. When Liotta finally did meet Hill at the film's premiere, both men were stunned by how accurately the actor had captured not just Hill's mannerisms, but his psychology and speech patterns. Hill later said it was like watching himself in a mirror, while Liotta was disturbed by how closely he had channeled someone he'd never encountered. This separation between actor and subject created a performance that was somehow more authentic than imitation could have achieved. Liotta had found the essence of Henry Hill without being constrained by his surface characteristics. The meeting between the two men was brief and uncomfortable, as both realized they had created an intimate connection without ever actually knowing each other. Goodfellas wasn't just a movie about gangsters. It was a mirror held up to American violence, materialism, and the seductive power of belonging to something larger than yourself, no matter how destructive. The film's enduring power comes not from its celebration of criminal life, but from its unflinching examination of the human cost of that lifestyle. Every laugh, every moment of seeming camaraderie, is undercut by the knowledge that these relationships are built on fear, violence, and the constant threat of betrayal. If this deep dive into cinema's most dangerous production blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking behind-the-scenes stories. Because, as Henry Hill learned the hard way, in the end, you always pay for the good times. And that's the hardest part. Today, everything is different. There's no action. I have to wait around like everyone else.